Hello and welcome to the video in which we are going to work on building a TipCalculator app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's jump straight to the basic building blocks that I've already kind of created here. And these are located in the Google Slides that were attached with this project/lab in Schoology. So if you haven't found those notes, go ahead and look for those in Schoology. And I've basically set up a file folder here called TipCalculator, and I've created 3 files: an HTML, a JavaScript, and a CSS file. And you see, make sure that your names don't have to be exactly the same as mine, but you do want to make sure that whatever you called your CSS file, that you are referencing it correctly here and referencing your JavaScript here correctly. And you can see when I've run my TipCalculator HTML, remember to only run an HTML file so you don't get that JSON file created. When you run that, this is what you should see at this point. If you have already created your JavaScript as I did, and I put some basic styling into my CSS, changing my body's background color, font family, font size, kind of information. And then I've set up some settings for my div, such as putting a border around it, border radius, background color, min height, min width, those kind of things to kind of give me a sense of what's going on here on my page. So again, this is the basic setup. I've got a div that's going to hold the directions that I'm going to provide to the user, an input field where they're going to type in the cost, and then a calculate button here, and another div for output where I'm going to give them out the output from the calculation, telling them how much the tip should be. So let's jump into the JavaScript and get this started. So you may remember this from the last lesson we did. When we're trying to capture information from the HTML, we're going to use a method called getElementById, which is part of the document, the DOM object that's created from the HTML page. And we're going to assign that to some variables. So I'm going to say let directions equal document dot get element by ID, and then I'm going to capture the directions ID that I created earlier. And we're going to do this again. We're also going to grab the input, which I stored as an ID. Not get animation, sorry about that. Get element by ID. I was just assuming it was going to know what I was doing here by now, but I guess not. So I'll grab my input. Make sure you're putting these semicolons here at the end. We just got a couple more here. Let's grab that button and set it equal to document dot get element by ID. Again, we'll grab that button. Now I'm choosing to use single quotations here. In JavaScript, when you're capturing these strings, you can create those strings with single quotes or double quotes. Doesn't really matter to JavaScript. So one more here. Let's do let output equal document dot get element by ID, and let's grab the output. And here I actually hit the double quotes, but I'll leave that there just to show you it doesn't really matter if you use single or double. So these 4 lines of code go into my TipCalculator HTML and captures the pieces of the page that I want to pull into my JavaScript and use. And then it stores them under these variables. So let's just write a quick note here to say what I'm doing here. So we are grabbing pieces of the HTML page to store as a variable for later use. All right, there we go. And now we kind of have an idea of what we're doing here. It's always nice to kind of give yourself an explanation of what's happening. So now that we have captured those elements, we can start to kind of manipulate the page a little bit. So let's start off with the directions. All right, I'm going to grab directions dot inner HTML, and if you remember, this is what is actually shown in between the starting and ending tag of this directions element that I've captured and stored as the variable directions. And that's an object in my JavaScript. So inner HTML is one of the properties that exists for that element object that's part of the DOM. So I'm going to assign this to be a string in which I explain to the user what I want them to do. So we'll say enter the cost of the meal, and then we can ask them, we can even drop a line here with a \n, and then we can say press, and we'll put calculate to get tip. Now notice when I put that single quotation in here, it didn't change from a string into anything else because I started my quotation with a double. So that allows me to use a single quote inside of the double quotes without changing it from a string to some other piece of JavaScript text. So now I've grabbed that, and if I refresh this now, you see that that information got put into the div. All right. So now it tells them what we expect them to do. Enter the cost of the meal, press calculate to get tip. But it's not doing anything at this point because we have not, and let's go ahead and just give ourselves a little note here to what we did. Change the text on the page for the directions. All right. So now, as I said, it's not really doing anything to the page. If I type in some values here, say my meal cost $10.50, if I press calculate, nothing's happening because I haven't told the page what to do with that information yet. So remember, when you are trying to write a series of code that performs a specific task, it's a good idea to write that as a function. So I'm going to actually do a multi-line comment here. And this is how I start the multi-line comment. So I'm going to write the function that will calculate the tip amount from, and now I can hit enter and come down a line, and it's still going to be part of that comment. So write the function that will calculate the tip amount from the cost of the meal at 15%. And then I can end this comment like that. So I'm writing a function. I'm going to start off with saying function. And then we got to give it a name. So basically it's looking for a verb. So I am calculating, let's see if I can spell correctly, calculating the tip, no space. And then I'm opening, closing the parentheses to indicate that there's not going to be any needed information when I call the function. It won't require any arguments. Now I do realize, and you may be thinking to yourself, but I need the cost of the meal. And so that's information that's needed for the function, but it's not information that's coming from the function call. It's information I'm going to use get using JavaScript inside the function. So let's start by getting that information and storing it in a variable called cost. So let cost equal, and I'm going to grab the input value. And again, this is just a quirky thing that's happening here with VS Studio Code. It's not recognizing input as an HTML input element, so it's not providing me with the ability to select value straight away. It's going to autocorrect it, so I'm just clicking off of it, coming back to it, then I can put my semicolon, and it doesn't autocorrect for me. Now, the problem with this, if you look here, if I hover over here on cost, it says any. It can be any value that's put in. But when I come over here and if I put a value into this field, it's not going to know what it is. But I want to be able to do math with it. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to parse float, because I want this value to be a decimal value that I'll be able to do some math with. So, I want to wrap this in parentheses because that's going to be the argument for my parse float method. So I'm just going to highlight it. All right, that was a shift instead of a control. Sorry, shift. There we go. And now I shift and hit my parentheses, and they wrap it around the value that was highlighted. So now the input value that gets put into this text field, because it is an input field, it can take letters, it can take numbers, it can take characters. Really, it could be any, which you saw. But now, whatever's put into there, I'm going to turn it into a float number. And now you see when I hover on cost, it no longer says any. It's going to be a number now. It's going to look for the number that's entered into that text input field, turn it into a number. And that allows me to calculate it with it. So let's create another variable called %. And we're going to set this to 15 to start with, right? Because, eventually we're going to let the user choose what percent. But for now, until we get this running, we're just going to set it at 15, and we'll go from there. So let's calculate the tip. Let tip equal cost multiplied by %, and then that needs to be divided by 100, because the percent is a whole number and it needs to be a decimal. So percent divided by 100 gives me that percent as a decimal value, multiplied by the cost becomes the tip. That's how much, if I want to tip 15%, if I know the cost, that's my calculation. Okay, so one thing we want to do here is just a little bit of kind of aesthetic cleanup here, is that the tip could be a decimal value of 16 different digits. I want it to be shown as money, and money is typically given to us with 2 decimal places. So let's recalculate this and see tip to be set to tip.toFixed, and then we're going to give it a 2 for 2 decimal places. And now if we hover on tip, we see that it's going to give us that value that we're looking for in a toFixed. It's still saying number, but actually toFixed is going to be a string. So we wouldn't be able to calculate with it anymore. So I'm not sure why it's not showing up as string anymore, but know that toFixed returns a string value with 2 decimal values. All right, and that'll be important later on. So let's go ahead, we'll save this as a variable here. So let's do output text is set equal to tell them the tip at, and then we'll do percent plus quotations. And this time we're not going to put a space here because I want that percent to be right next to the number. The tip at 15% will be, and then I'll go ahead and throw in a $sign here. And again, I'm not going to leave any spaces, but I will use a plus, and then we'll put tip here, and that will give us, that's going to take all that value, the percent and the tip, tie it up together into a string, which that string we can then assign to the output dot inner HTML, and we're going to assign that to be the output text. So again, I got my 10, let's refresh it. If I put 1050 into here and hit my calculate button, still nothing's happening. I just wrote a function that calculates the tip. It's supposed to take the value from here in the input field, calculate the tip, and then change the output inner HTML to be the output text. But it's not working for a couple of reasons. One, we have not attached this method, this function, to the calculate button. So I haven't called the calculate tip method because it's not attached anywhere. So to do that, I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to use the button dot on click. And so this is a built-in function to JavaScript. It's a global property actually, that is an event handler that when the element that I'm attaching to, the button, which is an HTML element, when that button is clicked, I can assign it to have a function. So when I click it, this function happens. And so I'm going to assign it to calculate tip. But the key here is, again, I'm not using parentheses because that parenthesis would actually call the method, and I'm not trying to call the method and give that to onClick. I'm trying to say when onClick it, when the button is clicked, then calculate tip will run at that point. So let's refresh this and let's see what we got here. So 10.50 and calculate, and there we see the tip at 15% will be $1.57, and we could adjust this. Let's say it was $25.36. Calculate, your tip is $3.80. So we see that it's operating the way that we want it to operate at this point, and we just need to add a little bit more CSS to this to make it look a little nicer here. So one thing we're going to do here is go back into our CSS, and we're going to style this explanation a little bit nicer here. So we're going to come down here, we're going to give it a hashtag directions, and we're going to open this up. Let's go ahead and add some padding to it. Let's say 15 pixels. Now watch when I do this though. You see it makes it look a little nicer in there, but you notice it also made this div larger because all the divs are 280, but the padding added 30 to the width because 15 on the left and 15 on the right. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to adjust this width down a little bit. So we'll make it 250 pixels. So with that extra 30, it doesn't get larger. All right. So that looks pretty nice there with the directions. I think we can go with that. But I'm thinking I want to make this border a little larger. Let's make it 3 pixels. There we go. Just make it stand out a little bit more. Okay, so let's kind of adjust my input here now. So let's hashtag input. And here, let's add a little bit of margin. And on top, we'll do top and bottom, we'll do 10 pixels. On the bottom, or left and right, we'll do 20 pixels. And then we can come down here and let's adjust this a little bit. It feels pretty wide in there, so let's adjust the width, say 60 pixels wide. And let's also adjust the height to be 60 pixels. So we'll get a nice square going on here. And we can add a little bit of padding here as well. Let's do 15 pixels as well for the padding. And let's put a border around it as well. So let's do this one 4px. And we can do something like an outset. And let's give it maybe a light gray. Now let's do a light blue. That might look pretty nice. There we go. That looks a little nicer in there. And now we can say 1050. Hit my calculate button. All right, still working, but it looks a little bit different here. Let's get that button now. Let's fix that button up a little bit. Let's also do one more thing here. Let's do our text align. Center that text. So now when it's 1050, that looks a little better. And maybe you want to make this a little bigger. So let's do text size, font size. Let's maybe do 1.2 M as well. Yeah, that looks a little nicer in there. Calculate, there we go. All right, so let's style our button a little bit. So for our button, we're kind of going to do the same thing here. Let's go ahead and make this width and we're going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's say 75 pixels. And we'll do a height of 75 pixels as well. And let's do a margin of, we can do the same thing. We'll just do a 15 here for this one, 15 pixels all the way around. And let's do this border radius. And if I make this, remember, if I do it the same as the width and height are both the same. And if I make that my border radius, it makes it into a circle. So there we go. That is my calculate button. All right. So we can do a couple more things here if you want. We may not have seen this, but let's do a background color here. So we can do background color. Let's make that maybe an aqua. There we go. Makes it stand out a little bit more there. And we can also do some maybe some box shadow. So box shadow. And where do we want, right? Where do we want to put this? We can make it maybe 15 pixels, 15 pixels. And we'll do a little bit smaller one, maybe 5 pixels on that side. And then we can make it maybe a dark gray. maybe a little too much. So let's take this down a little bit to 10. Refresh that. There we go. That's not too bad. It kind of sticks out there a little bit. And then, of course, we can make this font a little bigger. So font size, maybe we'll do 1.2 M as well. And let's make the font weight. And let's go maybe with 600. That's a little too big there then, huh? So maybe let's bring it down a little bit, 1.1. See how that works. And let's maybe make this 100. Just kind of playing around with it a little bit. Let's see if maybe bring the weight down. Okay, we'll do maybe 120 then. And let's do the border radius. 120. There we go. That kind of looks pretty good. And let's crank this back up to 600. There we go. That's not too bad. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we did a box shadow. We can actually also do a font shadow or text shadow. Not text. Yeah, we'll text align center as well. And let's come down here and do a text shadow. And for the text shadow, we can do something smaller, maybe a 3 pixel, 3 pixel, 3 pixel. And we can do again a dark gray. There we go. Kind of makes it stick out there a little bit more. That doesn't look too bad. That looks pretty all right. Okay, so last thing here, we need to kind of fix up the output as well. So let's come down here. We'll do hashtag output. And in here, we can kind of do some of the same stuff we did up here with the input. We've already changed the background color. Let's go ahead and we're okay, I think, because we did the div. So I think we're good, actually. We should be good. But let's do one more thing here. Let's go ahead and put this text align center here. That way, it'll already be text. That's really the only thing I wanted to be done in this output. So if we do 10.50, calculate. Okay, let's add a little bit of margin actually to our padding. So let's just do 10 pixels. And let's do one more. And we'll go another 10 pixels here. Okay, that's looking all right. Okay, so there we go. We've got that figured out, and it's starting to look a little nicer here. So that's our first phase, right? We've got it working. We get some simple information. It calculates for us. Thinking here, I do want to make this input a little bigger. Since we made that other one 75, let's go ahead and make, or 120, let's go ahead and make this maybe 75. make this a little bigger. That way, in case we get, now that it looks a little more balanced, in case we get a bigger meal, like 120, 36, we can fit that in there pretty well. Gives us our tip. Okay, so looking pretty good at this point. What we want to do now is maybe add in our second feature. Our second feature is going to allow the user to decide what kind of tip they want to provide. And so we're going to go back to our tip calculator here, and we're going to provide them with a drop-down menu. Okay? And we're going to start off with that up at the top. So we're going to come here before the directions. We're going to come down here and we're going to create a select. And we're going to call it the service, and its ID will also be service. That'll make it easy to find. All right. So inside the select, we're going to add some options. All right. And the first value, we'll start off with 15. But I want it to say, because I'm going to use the on change, so we'll start with a default value of 15. And I'm going to say, please rate your service. And that's going to be the first option. So if I refresh this, we see that's up there. Please rate your service. Right now, there's no drop down yet. So we're going to add some more options here. We'll go ahead and take this. We'll copy and we'll paste it here. So we'll start with 10% and we'll say 10%. And then give them a little gauge here of how they should judge that. Needs some work. And then come down here, we'll give another one, let's say 12%. Let's say something like, I can see they tried. Of course, you can make yours say whatever you want, just make sure it's not too rude. Let me say this is pretty standard service. And we'll add in another one here. We'll do maybe 18%. And we'll give one more value of 20%. And we'll just say 20%, and we'll say top notch. Okay, so we'll just refresh that up there, and we can see here now we have options to choose from. But at this point, nothing is happening in my value because we haven't entered anything into our JavaScript yet. So we're going to come back up here to grab those new elements, and we're going to create one more now. So we'll let, and we called this service, I believe. So let service equal document get element by ID, and let's grab that service ID. Okay, so now we've grabbed the service and we have that. So now we need to create a function to handle what we're doing with it. So we're going to come down here and we will say what we're doing here. So write the function to select the tip rate for service. So again, we'll create a function, and let's call this select tip rate. Okay, so what are we going to do here with this select tip rate? All right. Well, what we're going to do is open up a curly brace here. And what that's going to do is create a value. So let's say let percent equal, and we're going to grab that value. So again, parse float, open parentheses, since we already know that. And we're going to grab the service dot input, or sorry, value. Okay, so we're going to grab that value, we're going to parse it, turn it into a number, and then that percent is going to get returned, and we can go ahead and return percent, and we're going to go ahead and divide that by 100. So now we have a function that captures the value that's in this select drop-down menu, and then divides it by 100, and it's going to return it. This is a return function. So now we can come back up here to our calculate tip. Instead of it always being 15, we're going to come in here and call the select tip rate. And then we don't have to divide this by 100. We can just take that back out. And if we were to refresh this, let's say we come down here and we say service above and beyond. Let's just say $100 for our meal. We calculate the tip is now 0.18, will be $18. So I guess let's go ahead and put that divided by 100 out of there. We'll just do that back up here. There we go. We'll refresh that. Because we do want to say 18% there. So calculate the tip at 15% would be $15. Switch it to 20, calculate 20, and see here we can just keep changing it and hitting the calculate, and it's going to give us the different values at the different percentages. Okay, so that's working relatively well for what I want it to do. But let's say, my meal is some random number, right? So let's say 143.96. Calculate, it tells me the tip is $25.91. So my meal was $143.96. My tip was $25.91. So how much should I give them? What's the amount that I put on the table for the bill? And so let's go ahead and add one more feature to this, which is to have them actually provide me with the full amount of the tip and the amount of money that I'm going to pay. So we have this output.text. We get this amount. Let's go ahead and add to it. So output text, and we'll do plus equals, and we'll open up a new string. We'll start a new line, and we'll say the total cost with tip is, and we'll put a little $sign here. So what's going on here that we're going to run into a little bit of a problem is because it's a to fixed, right? So it's not going to be able to add the tip to the cost because of how I told it. So I want to add some value total. Doesn't know what total is right now. It'll come up. There we go. Now it's not auto correcting me. So because I can't just say add the tip to the cost, I'm going to have to do an intermediate step here. We'll say let total equal cost plus, and here we have to change the tip. So we'll parse float tip. And so total becomes a number again because cost is a number. The tip will become a number. And so now let's refresh this. Let's do 143.96, calculate, and then it tells us the tip is $21.59. The total cost is $165.55. And there we go. That is our website functioning properly. Really just don't like the way that this drop-down menu is styled here. So we're gonna fix that because we have to go back to our CSS now, and let's style what we have here. So come down here, and we are going to pick. We can just style the select, and that way it will go into the drop-down options as well. So let's make this a little bigger. So again, we'll do our font size. Again, we'll do the 1.2M, and that's going to make it bigger. There we go. Let's go ahead and make that border a little nicer. So again, let's do something like maybe make that a little thicker, 6px solid, and then we'll do, we'll just keep it black. Fresh, there we go. Please rate your service, and there's our choices. Maybe we want to give it a little bit more margin, so get it off the edge there. And so we can do something maybe 15 pixels on the sides. Oh, that's top bottom, so let's do like maybe 5 pixels on the top, and let's do 15 pixels on the sides. So refresh, that kind of moves it over there a little bit nicer, but it kind of seems like it's a little too long. So let's go ahead and do a width of maybe 280 pixels as well. Make that 250. Yeah, we're gonna have to go a little bigger. So I want to make sure that fits in there. All right, 300. See, that's big enough. There we go. So that fits. And it doesn't get quite all of these in there, but you get the main percentage. And you can adjust that if you like. I'm going to go with what I have here. All right. So now we have it working where we can enter the value, right? 24.76. We can calculate, tells us the tip amount, gives us the total value we want, and we can change that if we want. And then it tells us up. Let's go back. You see what's happening here is I have to send it back. So in here, after we do the calculation, let's go ahead and do a total equals total, total dot to fixed. And let's put it back to 2 decimal places again. All right, so and now we can do the 24 56, calculate, there we go. Okay, so looking pretty decent. I think that will pretty much cover what we need here. If you have any questions or concerns, I will be in class on Thursday, and you can stop after school, or Friday during returns or in class. I'll see you then. All right, so have a good day.